Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Marty Ross, and this is another Conversations with Marty Ross MD. Tonight, we're going to explore Lyme disease, and our exploration is going to be based on your questions. So this is a Lyme Q&A webinar, and you create it with what you ask me. So we'll go where the questions take us. I hope to be able to answer as many as I can. As many of you know that have participated in these webinars before, I'm not always able to get through every question. There's usually a lot more than we can handle. I do ask as you write your questions, which you could do in the chat box over there on the bottom, down there on the bottom, is where you write your questions to me through the chat box. When you write your question, only hit the enter key one time before you send the question to me. If you try to use the enter key to create paragraphs, what it does is actually sends multiple questions to me, and it gets to be hard for me to track what has happened on my side, okay? I am creating a recording of the webinar tonight, and that recording should be available to you by around 6 to 6:30 in the morning Seattle time. So we're 3 hours different than the East Coast of the United States here. So be aware of that. And I use the email that you signed up for the webinar with. So that should go out tomorrow morning. And then this is the first of 3 webinars for April. So I'm going to do one tonight, one in 1 week, and then one a week after that, and I'll take a week off again. I hopefully have plenty of time to explore in the next 3 weeks various questions that you may have, okay? So while I'm doing the webinar tonight, I'm actually going to post your questions on the screen. So you'll be able to see those if you're participating in the live version. If you happen to be listening to a recorded version of this tomorrow, though, you won't be able to see any of the questions displayed because they only show up if you participate in the live version of the webinar. All right. So with no further ado, I think we'll go ahead and get started here with the first question. Let me see what we got here. All right. So this is from John. Hi, Dr. Ross. Thank you for this webinar. You're welcome. I suspect I have babesia with symptoms of shortness of breath, heartaches, fatigue, and reflux. Tried Artemisia and Cryptolepis, which gave me weaker heart and wrist ankle pain and liver aches. Could it be babesia, Lyme, mold, heavy metals? What would you recommend? Thank you. I'm not quite sure how to answer your question because I'm not sure what you're saying by could it be the babesia, Lyme, mold, and heavy metals. If you mean your symptoms, it could be any of those. And I guess what I would need to do is actually ask you a lot more questions to help figure it out. Symptoms that make me think of having babesia are air hunger, which also could be shortness of breath, which is a feeling that you just can't get enough air from time to time. Also, having sweats at nighttime or night sweats, temperature dysregulation where you're hot 1 minute and cold the next minute makes me think of babesia. People that with babesia often will have headaches in the front of the head, not necessarily in the back of the head, but more in the front of the head. Sometimes they'll have racing or skipping of the heart. And then at times, people with babesia have kind of an odd symptom. And what that odd symptom is they'll have symptoms of deja vu. They have frequent deja vu experiences, okay? So those are things that make me think of babesia. I don't often think of the heartaches that you're having. Fatigue can be part of babesia. Acid reflux is not necessarily part of babesia. When you say that your heart got weaker on Artemisia and Cryptolepis, I don't understand what that symptom means, heart weaker. I would need to ask you a lot more questions about that too. So I'm sorry, there's just not enough specificness in this question for me to be able to respond other than the comments that I just gave you. For those of you that want to see this list of babesia symptoms that I just made, let me do a quick screen share here for you. As many of you know, I have written a book called the Treat Lyme Book. And this is the Treat Lyme book here. It's an online site. And through here, basically, you probably can find questions to most or answers to most of your Lyme questions. It is subscription-based, although I've been having some problems with the subscription function here lately. So it's very possible that if you try to read it these days, you might even be able to read most of the things without having to pay to read it. But I think I'm in the process of getting that fixed. So anyhow, I do my own web work as well, too, on top of being a physician here. So things sometimes don't work the way I quite want them to. So anyhow, if you look here in this chapters tab, And if you want to know how do you figure out what you have, look at this chapter called How to Diagnose, where I have articles about how to diagnose mold toxicity, for instance. How do you figure out if you might have virus infections? And then finally, there's this one called How to Diagnose Babesia. Okay, so take a look at this article. It gives you the information that you need to figure out whether you have Babesia or not. All right. Okay. All right. Let me go back here. All right. Thanks for that question, John. And good luck to you. All right. Wow. Okay. So Jackie, I see that Jackie, I'm going to post Jackie's question in a minute, but it looks like there may be, this is a longer question that will show up in, I think, about 3 different installments. Okay. So here's part 1. Good evening. Hi, Jackie. Hopeful to start treatment with you as soon as possible. For looks like Lyme, Babesia, Bartonella for 24 years. 7 years ago, misdiagnosis, and has had something called pseudotumor cerebri. MRI revealed something called empty sella. Doc did not tell me. Thyroid always seems slow. Eat mostly healthy vegan diet, but overweight with dry hair, nails, etc. Wonder if Babesia caused the empty sella. So to answer that question, Jackie, I don't actually know. There's no studies that actually would suggest that. I treat a lot of people with Babesia and have never seen that condition. So everyone, empty sella, there's a part of the brain called the sella turcica that can be seen on an MRI. And sometimes the part of the brain isn't there that's supposed to be there, basically. And so that's called empty sella turcica or empty sella syndrome. And Jackie says she has that. And again, I just haven't seen Babesia cause that before. So let's see, been depressed past few months as I look worn out, purple circles under the eyes, skin looks unhealthy with permanent pimple-like bumps, feel like I look overweight and malnourished or like a drug addict, sagging, right eyelid, several more symptoms which could be Lyme, but seem like something here. Empty sella. For several years now, period is erratic. Every other month appeared too quickly. Feel hormones are off. Should I see just you with general doc, or should I also see an endocrinologist, neurologist, neuro-ophthalmologist, and other specialists? Looking so unhealthy and quickly aged is very upsetting. All right. So Jackie, what boy, there's a lot going on with you. That, my new patient visits, I spend an hour and a half with a person, and that's so I can take a good history, hear what your story is, hear what your symptoms are, see what's been tried. And in that visit, after gathering all this information, then I decide if we need to bring in specialists like endocrinologists and neurologists, et cetera. So what I would say, if you do plan on being a patient of mine, start with me first. I'll be glad to help figure out, and the part of that, as course of that visit, whether we need to get the help of specialists or not. Okay, that's the best I can answer at this point on that. All right, and if you do become a patient here, I look forward to helping you. All right, take care. Bear with me here, everyone. I got to remove those so I can get to the other questions here. Hello, Oscar. Let's see. Hi, Dr. Ross. Been treated for Lyme, BART, and Babesia for 9 months. Normal autoimmune workup, except the ANI anti-nuclear antibody IFA was 1 to 40. Normal electrolytes. When I go out in the sun a few hours later or the next morning, I get extremely weak and lethargic. Slightly high ACE levels and slight neutropenia. What can I do? I think there was more of a question here too. Let me see if there's a part 2 that I can find here, Oscar. Let's see. Here's a second part that I see. Are the palpitations caused by Lyme? Oh, well, this is a second question. Let me answer this one too. Are the palpitations caused by Lyme minor heart blocks? So the palpitations occur even not in Lyme. And what palpitations means is that you have a feeling of your heart skipping around. And we use that word to actually mean a condition for which when you do an EKG, which is a heart monitor, or you look at a 24-hour electric monitor of the heart called a Holter monitor, palpitations usually indicate that there isn't actually any skipping around going on. There isn't anything you can actually see on an EKG or see when you do a 24-hour monitor. So palpitations are more of a sensation of skipping that doesn't actually correspond with anything going on with an electrical pattern, all right? Now, having said that, sometimes that skipping you feel does have an electrical pattern that shows up on an EKG that explains why it's happening. And one cause of skipping around could be a heart block, okay? One cause. So, but not all skipping around is necessarily a heart block, and not all feelings of skipping around actually have anything that show up on an EKG. And when there isn't anything that shows up, we call that a palpitation. All right? I hope that answers your question there, Oscar, at least on that part of it. Let me go back to the first part of your question here. Let's see. So let me just go over a few things about the first part of your question. Let me repost it here. So one of the things that you said is that you have an anti-nuclear antibody that's elevated at 1 to 40. So everyone, that means that his immune system is making antibodies against the genetic material in his cells, okay? And some doctors consider that to be the lupus test, the lupus arthritis test, but actually it's not specific. It doesn't, when you've got an ANA that's elevated, we can't really tell by just looking at the test as to what the cause is. I will tell you Lyme is a possible cause of that elevated anti-nuclear antibody, okay? All right, so in terms of getting more fatigued when you go out in the sun, there are some people that when you go out in the sun, that can create more inflammation. And one of the physicians that has written quite a bit about that is, oh boy, I'm going to blank here all of a sudden. I have my own 50-year-old moments periodically. I apologize. I'm blanking. It'll probably come to me throughout it'll be one of those things I'll keep working on here as we're talking. The one thing that this under this protocol, this physician that has written about this finds, is that if you happen to have, if sunshine makes you worse, sometimes one of the medicines that can help is to be on something that is an ACE inhibitor, a type of blood pressure medicine called an ACE inhibitor, okay? And so the one that can be helpful with that is something called Benicar, 20 milligrams, one pill, one time a day. That could give you some benefit there. But beyond that, I don't have any good ideas for this one, Oscar. All right? All right. Good luck to you. Boy, it's bothering me. I'm blanking on the name of that protocol. It'll come. Let's see here. All right. Hello, JD. Let's see. Your time is appreciated. You're welcome. Recently, I had some labs drawn. The hepatitis A, B, and C were negative. My liver enzymes have gone down from 294 to 209. Do you think I should use glutathione? My MCH is still low at 26.7. Should I be concerned? Okay. MCH, everyone, is a test that has to do with the size of your red blood cells. I don't think I would worry about it at this level. In terms of your liver enzymes going down, liver enzymes can be elevated from having infection like hepatitis A virus, hepatitis B virus, hepatitis C virus that were all negative in your situation, okay? They also can become elevated from being on antibiotics. Sometimes that can lead to liver inflammation. And then sometimes I have actually seen Lyme give a hepatitis liver inflammation too. So if I've got somebody that's got a really elevated liver enzymes and I rule out hepatitis A, B, and C, and then I do things to correct their hepatitis, like being on glutathione, and I stop antibiotics, and yet the liver inflammation does not get better, sometimes I will still go ahead and continue to treat the Lyme. I'll go back on antibiotics to try to treat for Lyme, and often that may get better. So one thing I want to let you know is elevated liver enzymes sometimes, rarely, can be due to hepatitis caused by Lyme, all right? Now, with elevated liver enzymes, so one thing you can do to help them is to be on the antioxidant that is used by the liver to detox, but it protects the liver, and that's glutathione. Glutathione is a good way to do that. I like using glutathione. If I'm going to use it, I like to use it as a liposomal variety, which means it's microscopically wrapped in fat to increase its absorption. And the product I like for that is a product made by Research Nutritionals called Trifortify. There's actually 2 flavors. One is an orange, and there's a Trifortify watermelon, for instance. 5 milliliters of their preparation is 450 milligrams, which is adequate. 1 time a day you would do that, okay? Another way to raise glutathione is to actually take one of the building blocks for glutathione, which is to use something called N-acetylcysteine, and that you would use as 500 milligrams 3 times a day. And that is a building block that the liver uses to make glutathione that can also help lower liver inflammation as well too, okay? So those are some ideas for you to think about. And again, for those of you that have elevated liver numbers and you stop the antibiotics and they've ruled out all other causes and it's still staying elevated, usually what I'll do is just jump back into my Lyme treatment with antibiotics, and often those numbers will come down over time just by treating the Lyme. Okay, so there's some things for you to think about. Okay, I'm going to just do a quick screen share here again. All right, so I want to show you. Okay, so this is, if you hear me mention various supplements tonight and you're wondering what are some high quality products that I use in my practice, this is actually the site where my patients reorder their supplements, and anyone can order here, okay? So for instance, if you want to know which glutathione I use, you would just go ahead and type in the word glutathione in the search function here. And what you'll see shows up are both of those Trifortify products, okay? This is Trifortify Orange, and there is the Trifortify Watermelon. All right, so this is just to give you an idea where you might find things. If you're looking for curcumin, many of you know that I talk about using curcumin. Or actually, let's do this, the N-acetylcysteine. So you just type in cysteine that I was just telling you about. And there is the Thorne product we carry called Cystoplus. That is a good source of that N-acetylcysteine too, okay? So I wanted you to show you this because sometimes people have questions about what's a high quality supplement, because there's been a lot of studies done looking at supplements that are sold even in supplement stores, the kind you retail supplement stores. What you'll find is that there's been a lot of studies done looking at the quality of those supplements, and often the active ingredients they choose are not effective or not chosen, and they don't do what they say they're going to do. Or secondly, they don't even have the active ingredients in them. There's been numerous studies about supplements you buy at the store not having, being very poor quality, basically. But the ones that I choose here, I choose because I expect that they're going to work. And I've done the research on them to know that what they say is in them is in them. And then by using in my practice over time, I have found them to be quality products. Also, the ones that I choose for the store are ones that have artificial ingredients in them that tend to be limited, number one. But secondly, if there are anything that's artificial in them, I've tried to choose ones that aren't going to be harmful to somebody that has Lyme disease as well too. All right. So if you're looking at what would I recommend, that's where you can find it. All right. Let me go back here. Thanks for your question, Janie. Let's see here. Let me get rid of that question. Oh, thanks, Janie. Janie says, love your Treat Lyme book. I appreciate that. All right. Hello, Kit. Let's see. I'm going far away to a grad program in July. I still have some symptoms, and ideally my doctor wants me on another year of oral antibiotics. Already completed the year. He said we could try 2 weeks of IV doxy and gentamicin because of my time constraint. What's your opinion? You know, so I don't know that you really get much for that. I'll just say that, okay? And then let me tell you what I tell my patients based on my own observations about IV antibiotics versus oral antibiotics. So oral antibiotic combinations to treat Lyme, I find to work effectively 85 to 90% of the time. So any combination I put a person on will work 85 to 90% of the time, all right? By comparison, IV antibiotics work about 90 to 95% of the time. So maybe a 5% better chance, okay? But oral versus IV, I don't find to work any more quickly. Secondly, a 2-week course of antibiotics I have rarely seen to create major changes. Usually, courses of antibiotics are going to take about a month or 2 months to start making a difference. So I don't know that you really get anything out of doing this, okay? And I don't think it actually shortens your time course of doing the treatment to do IV either. So just for the reasons that your physician's wanting to do this, I don't know you're going to get any benefit out of it. At least that's based on my experience, okay? So good luck to you, Kit. And good luck with grad school, too. Let's see. Hello, Mary Jo. Let's see. Are you seeing mast cell problems such as SIRS in patients treating Lyme and co-infections aggressively? All right. So SIRS, everyone, stands for something called chronic inflammatory response syndrome. I just thought of something. All right. So remember we were talking about the question earlier about the Oscar who goes out in the sun and gets really fatigued. The physician that's written a lot about that is Trevor Marshall. And he has written, he's not even a physician, he's a PhD actually. And he has something called the Marshall Protocol that I largely find not helpful in Lyme, but it basically, he used it to help treat his medical condition called sarcoidosis, which he thought was due to infections inside of cells, okay? And so he developed an elaborate way of getting medicines into cells that uses low doses of antibiotics and get the antibiotics into the cells using low doses by not being on vitamin D, being in rooms that are dark so you don't get sunlight that creates vitamin D in your skin, and then also being on the Benicar that I was telling you about, okay? So it's Trevor Marshall, and so Oscar, again, I told you it would come to me. So Oscar, what I would do is, but I like his Benicar idea, which would be 20 milligrams one time a day. And again, his name is Trevor Marshall, okay? So anyhow, Mary Jo, I'm sorry. I don't know why, but reading your question triggered me to think about that. And they're not even related. But anyhow, chronic inflammatory response syndrome or SIRS, is a term created by a physician named Richie Shoemaker. And Richie Shoemaker is a family doctor out in the Chesapeake Bay area, out in Pocomoke, Maryland, that discovered that if you use a medicine called cholestyramine, it can help remove toxins in people, and specifically remove mold toxins. So Dr. Shoemaker has developed a whole elaborate science around this idea that and what he has been able to show is that 25% of people that have been exposed to mold toxins in their environment are not able to get rid of them. And if they're not able to get rid of them, those mold toxins trigger inflammation, all right? And so what he found is that he can use a binder called cholestyramine to bind up those mold toxins to pull them out of a person, but that some people still remained really sick. And so what he did then is he started trying to figure out, well, maybe the mold toxins triggered ongoing inflammation. And he developed a whole elaborate theory that shows that, yep, after you get mold toxicity, maybe even after you clear the mold toxins, that inflammation remains due to a number of problems. And that is what he calls chronic inflammatory response syndrome. All right. Now, what I think actually is that he's right. People do remain chronically inflamed, but it may be because after you remove their mold, they might still have Lyme in them that's triggering inflammation, or they may have other things that can trigger inflammation, okay? So I don't know that I totally buy all of his ideas for why there's inflammation, but I do think he has contributed a lot of things about mold toxicity and how we can deal with mold toxicity, okay? All right, now, mast cell problems, there's another newer problem that's been described by a different physician who is a Greek physician, and I can never say his last name, so I'm not going to be able to say it right now. But he has come up with a term called mast cell activation syndrome. And in this, there's a type of cell called mast cells. Mast cells, traditionally, most of us think of mast cells as being involved in people that have allergic reactions, okay? So mast cells are where histamines are made. So if you have pollens, if you're allergic to certain foods, they land on a mast cell and they cause the mast cell to get activated, releasing histamines, all right? So most of us traditionally have thought of mast cells being activated only in allergic type conditions. What this Greek physician has been able to show us, in fact, is that based on his science, is that mast cells actually get activated when you have chronic infection. And they make cytokines, all right? So many of you in my webinars have heard me time and time again talk about the main reason that people feel sick when they have Lyme is that their white blood cells have overproduced a group of chemicals called cytokines. All right, so when a white blood cell sees a Lyme germ, or it sees yeast in your intestines, or it sees chronic virus infections, or it sees mold toxins, those white blood cells are going to try to get rid of all of those things. And to do that, they make a group of chemicals called cytokines. Cytokines are good and bad. On the good side, they cause more white blood cells to be made. They draw those white blood cells to where the infection is, and they help the white blood cells work better, okay? The trouble is in Lyme or in mold toxicity, 25% of people, for 25% of people, according to Richie Shoemaker, and sometimes in chronic virus infections, and sometimes if you have too many yeast in your intestines, what happens is the immune system overproduces cytokines because it tries harder and harder to get rid of things. And too many cytokines give you Lyme symptoms. They make it so you can't think. They make it so you can't sleep. They can interfere with how your hormonal systems work. They give you body pain. So all those symptoms we call Lyme symptoms are actually too many cytokine symptoms, okay? So it is possible then that, and so what Dr. I think, God, I wish I could, I'm not, he's a Greek physician. That's all I can tell you. What he's been able to show now is that these mast cells, when they get activated from chronic infection, also release cytokines. And sometimes they get activated to release their histamines, okay? So there are some people as part of their Lyme that have a lot of situations that look like they have histamines. So they get hives, or they react to a lot of their foods, or they get skin rashes really easily. That's it. Or they get periods where they can't breathe because their mast cell activation triggers asthma, for instance, okay? So there is an allergic component to their chronic infection, and that's probably because their mast cells have been activated as part of their chronic infection. Now, that does not happen in everyone that has Lyme, but it can happen in some, okay? So the relationship between mast cell problem and SIRS is chronic inflammation set off by mold toxicity, which may also have other infections involved, okay? And mast cell activation syndrome also has a lot of chronic inflammation in it because infections activates these mast cells to make cytokines, but also activates them to make histamines, okay? So it is not true that everyone with Richie Shoemaker's SIRS, though, has mast cell problems. Nor is it true that everyone that has Lyme has mast cell problems, okay? But for some people it can be, and those mast cells, if they get activated, trigger a lot more cytokines to be made. So, am I seeing mast cell activation? Yes, I'm not seeing it anymore, and when I treat somebody aggressively or not, okay? There is some testing you can do for it, but it's not that good. You start thinking about mast cell activation when you see an allergic component like hives or runny nose or reactive airway disease, asthma, as part of treating them, okay? And what you would do for the mast cell part of it to calm the histamine part is you can get on something called quercetin. And quercetin comes from the skin of colorful fruits and vegetables. It's known as a mast cell stabilizer, all right? And it's 250 milligrams, and I would do 500. It comes in a 250 milligram pill, and I would do 500 milligrams 3 times a day. It also stabilizes mast cells so they don't make histamines, and it gets inside of white blood cells and limits their ability to make cytokines, not just mast cells, but other white blood cells, it limits their ability to make cytokines. So many of you know that I like using curcumin to lower cytokines. But if I've got somebody that I think there is a mast cell activation part of their illness, instead of using curcumin, I'm probably going to use quercetin, 500 milligrams 3 times a day, because it's going to decrease the histamines out of those mast cells, and it's going to get inside white blood cells and limit cytokine production too. Okay. Anyhow, those are my thoughts. I hope that answered your question. I don't think I'm seeing it anymore when I treat somebody aggressively or not aggressively. Okay. All right. Good luck to you, Mary Jo. All right. Let's see here. Hello, Jackie. Let's see. I appreciate your caring and thoughtful help so much. Can't wait to be your Thank you, Jackie. I appreciate that. Let's see here. All right. Hello, Rita. Let's see. Hello, Dr. Ross. I'm wondering about your thoughts on taking amoxicillin 500 milligrams 2 times daily with Tindamax 250 milligrams on Saturday and Sunday only as a follow-up Lyme treatment. Depends on what you mean by follow-up Lyme treatment. So let me make some comments. I probably will answer this as part of that. But okay, so to treat Lyme when somebody has active Lyme, Lyme that's not in remission, Lyme that is still very active, amoxicillin I like to use at 1,000 milligrams 3 times a day, up to 2,000 milligrams 3 times a day, okay? When you get up to the 2,000 milligrams 3 times a day, that is the equivalent of doing an IV treatment. I like calling that an IV equivalent treatment. It can work as effective as IV antibiotics, okay? By comparison, just be aware, most infections like ear infections, sinus infections, throat infections, when we use amoxicillin, we're going to use it at 500 milligrams 3 times a day, which is 1,500 milligrams total a day. And the way that I just said, I sometimes use amoxicillin is up to 6,000 milligrams a day, okay? But this dose that you're using at 500 milligrams 2 times a day is not going to be effective against active Lyme, all right? And then when somebody's got active Lyme for an adult, the Tindamax, which is useful at treating cyst Lyme, probably picks up intracellular Lyme. Your amoxicillin is treating spiricate Lyme. So those of you that are new to all of this, be aware your Lyme germ exists in you in 3 forms. You have to treat all 3 forms at the same time. So as you put your antibiotics together, you got to come up with ones that are going to treat all 3 forms. Amoxicillin and Tindamax collectively treat the spiricate, which is what amoxicillin does. That's the corkscrew-looking thing you've seen on the internet before. You see pictures of that on the internet, okay? And then Lyme lives inside of your cells, and we call that intracellular Lyme or L-form Lyme. And then it also has a microscopic cyst form. In addition, Lyme has the ability to cover itself in a slime layer, okay? So the Tindamax would be good for intracellular cyst and can help break down biofilm. According to some Petri dish experiments, it does at least. And the amoxicillin would treat spiricate Lyme. A dose I like to use in an adult between 100 and 150 pounds when I have active Lyme for the Tindamax is 500 milligrams twice a day. And if they're over 150 pounds, I like to use 500 milligrams 3 times a day. And yeah, you can pulse it a few days on a week and then be off for a few days. I have no problem with that, okay? So if what you mean, I don't know what you mean exactly by follow-up Lyme treatment, but if what you mean is that you're having active Lyme and this is another antibiotic regimen to treat it, then no, these are too low of doses, okay? But from when I get somebody in remission, which means their Lyme is no longer active, I think we've done everything we can with the antibiotics. Either they're 100% well or we got them to a good place, and no matter what I do with the antibiotics, I just can't get them to a better place. Then I say that they're in remission. And if they're in remission, there's a variety of things you can do to stay in remission. And one part of that could be to remain on low-dose antibiotics to help police the environment to swat the germs down so they don't come back as easily, okay? And that could be what you mean by follow-up Lyme treatment. In terms of that, this could be an effective regimen. I haven't actually used it before, but it is a low dose regimen that sometimes can be effective. Low dose regimens in general can sometimes be effective. I also like working with Banderol Cemento to help keep people in remission. And for that, those two herbal products I like to use as 15 drops twice a day. Sometimes I'll do it as 15 drops one time a day. Be aware that when I'm using those for full-on treatment, I'm talking 30 drops of each twice a day. For those of you that are not familiar with those two products, they're made by NutraMedics. Cemento is cat's claw, and a Banderol is something called atoba bark extract. There's a tree in South America called the atoba tree, and the Banderol comes as an extract out of that tree. Okay. Now, to keep in remission, there are some other things that you should do. Okay. And if you want to read more about this, you could take a look at my article. I'm going to do a quick screen share here. All right. So in the Treat Lyme book, take a look at under the chapters, and there's a chapter in here about the end of treatment. And you might want to take a look at this article. It's called Finished: How to Prevent Relapse. Okay. And in here, in addition to possibly being on low dose antibiotics, I lay out a number of other things that you might want to do. All right. So it's just not about being on the low dose antibiotics to stay in remission. Okay. All right. Let me go back here. All right. Rita, good luck to you. Thank you for that question. Hello, Brittany. Hold on here just a minute. I got to take a sip of water. All right. Let's see. Hi, Brittany. Let's see. Hi. I'm wondering, do you recommend Lyme patients that are not in Lyme remission to vaccinate their children in infancy and beyond? I personally have immune-related issues and concerned about vaccines taxing my baby's body. Thanks for your feedback. Boy, the whole vaccine issue is a little complicated. I do think, this is my opinion, okay? I think we're tending to over-vaccinate these days. And when I am a family physician by training, and before I moved into Lyme treatment, I used to do well child care. I do think that vaccines can be used judiciously. However, if you live in an area, we're starting to see more whooping cough. If there happens to be a lot of whooping cough, I think it's a good idea to vaccinate against that. Okay. I do think that there's risk of getting tetanus. I think we should be vaccinating against that. The hepatitis B vaccine, for instance, I don't think we necessarily need to do even in people that are not Lyme related. Okay. And I could go through every one of these, but a lot of this, what's the best, when would it be good to vaccinate, and what kind of schedule gets to kind of be a complicated discussion that should be based more on your baby's risk. Your question, I think, is because you've had a hard time, would your baby have a hard time? That's not necessarily true. I think probably this is one of those situations where it'd probably be better if I knew more about your health overall and your baby's health, where I could give you actually better one-on-one guidance on the vaccines. Okay. So I'm sorry, I can't give more specific answer than that, but I appreciate the question. Thank you. Excuse me here a minute. Hello, Sue Ann. Let's see here. Let me get your question posted up. Hello, Sue Ann. Let's see. I've been taking antibiotics and nystatin for nearly 4 months, but recently stopped the antibiotics because of sensitivities. I am now taking BLT for Bartonella. So you think it would be okay for me to stop taking nystatin? So just on that question. So first of all, one thing, just a few comments, okay? So when people start developing sensitivities to medicines, one thing I always want to make sure is that they haven't developed too many yeast in the intestines. All right, so what's the relationship? Well, if you get too many yeast in the intestines, that creates something called leaky gut, which is a situation. So normally what happens in your intestines is there's the inside of the intestines. Then there's one layer of cells that touches really tight. So inside, one layer of cells, and then you have your blood vessels down here, all right? The way that things get from the inside of the intestines into your blood vessels down here is they have to be absorbed inside of these cells, pass through the cells, and then into the bloodstream, all right? So this is a tight barrier that keeps things out that you might be allergic to, right? And there's no gaps in these cells, all right? Now, if you get too many yeast, what happens is you get gaps between these cells, and now you can get big pieces of antibiotics or food, like big pieces of corn leaking through here. And what they hit is the biggest part of our immune system is the gut lining. Right below these cells, between these cells and your blood vessels here is your immune system. About 60 to 70% of the immune system sits there, okay? So if you get gaps, things leak through, hit the immune cells that normally would not hit them in big pieces, and it can trigger allergic reaction, and it can trigger sensitivities, all right? So when I've got somebody that's developed sudden sensitivities, I'm going to be very careful to figure out, have they developed too many yeast in the intestines from being on antibiotics? And even being on nystatin and being on probiotics, you can still get too many yeast, all right? So how do you know you have too many yeast? Well, you got to consider some symptoms. One is, are there increased sugar cravings? Is there more intestinal gasiness and bloating? Have you developed problems swallowing? Sometimes if you get yeast up here in your food pipe, it makes it feel like things get caught, so it's hard to get food down. Sometimes if you have too many yeast, you can develop acne. Yeah, acne can be related to too many yeast in the intestines. And what the relationship appears to be is that there's toxins that get released from those yeast. They get into your blood system, and then they interact with the skin in people that are genetically predisposed, and it can trigger more acne, okay? Another sign of having too many yeast is if you happen to be getting vaginal itching or vaginal discharge if you're a woman, all right? So I would just be careful before you give up totally on your antibiotics. Make sure that you may not have a yeast problem, okay? And those are some things to consider, all right? Now, in terms of your question, and I just wanted to make that comment, all right? In terms of your question, I would probably remain on the nystatin for a couple reasons. Number one, the BLT, even though it is an herbal mixture, has anti-herbal antibiotics in it that may knock down your bacteria in your intestines, allowing yeast to grow too much. Now, there is not as great of a problem of that happening on a BLT or on a Banderol or on a Cemento, but it could still happen. So I usually still like to keep people on nystatin as a means of doing policing to keep the yeast down, okay? So everyone, nystatin is a prescription anti-yeast medicine that stays just in the intestines. It is not systemically absorbed, so there's no toxicity from it, okay? And it can do a nice job of keeping yeast down. You need to still couple it with probiotics, though, all right? Now, so one reason to stay on the nystatin is the BLT may still lead to yeast, okay? But even if there's a lower chance, you still, after you stop prescription antibiotics, are at a high risk of getting too many yeast in your intestines, usually for up to about 4 months is what I find. So even when I stop prescription antibiotics, even if I'm not going to go to a BLT or a Banderol or a Cemento or other herbal antibiotics, I still am going to want to do nystatin for about 4 months before I stop it, because there is an increased risk of getting yeast for even that long of a period of time after you stop your prescription antibiotics, okay? All right, let me show you all a few things from the Treat Lyme book here. All right, so if you're looking at, you want to figure out if you have too many yeast, take a look at my chapter on yeast. And in here, you're going to see some things I recommend, like there's an experimental treatment called Lufeneron. There's an article that I've written called A Silent Problem, Do You Have Yeast? It helps you figure out whether you might. And then there's an article in here called Kills Yeast, A Brief Guide, which gives you ideas that I have about how to take care of yeast. There's herbal as well as prescription options in here too, okay? All right, let me go back here. All right, Sue Ann, good luck to you. I hope that answered your question. Let's see. Hello, Rita. Let's see. I have only had Doxy for the past 9 months off and on, and we are now attempting to treat other Lyme forms. Let's see. My doctor is not a Lyme specialist, but is trying to help her many Lyme patients. Thank you for what you do. All right. So, Rita, just a couple comments. I don't see that there's a follow-on question here. Let me make sure. No, I'm not seeing it. Okay. So the one thing, in terms of how to construct a Lyme treatment, there's a article that I've written about Lyme antibiotics. I'll show you it to you in a minute. But in that article, I described that when you design a treatment for Lyme, you've got to treat all three forms of the germ. The doxycycline that you've been on will treat intracellular Lyme and spirochete Lyme, but isn't going to do anything about cyst Lyme, all right? A simple thing you could add to make that a cyst Lyme treatment as well is to add an herbal supplement called grapefruit seed extract, which works really well. It's 250 milligrams, one pill twice a day, and then you could remain on the doxycycline, okay? But I can show you an article where you can look at other options on that, and you could even print this off and show it to your physician. And in this article, this is one of my free articles. So take a look at my free reads chapter here and look at my article called A Lyme Disease Antibiotic Guide. And in here, I talk about how to build a Lyme treatment. And I even describe the various antibiotics. And then finally, down here at the bottom in part 3, I have Lyme disease antibiotic combination examples. Okay, this is where I tell you how to put different things together to treat all three forms of the Lyme germ. You could print this off and bring it to your physician to get some guidance that way. Okay, all right. And as I said, that happens to be one of my free articles. Although, again, I'm having some problems with my subscription service that's making it so it's not always activating at this point. So you may find, until I get that fixed, many of you may find you can read articles without having to pay for them. So just to let you be aware of that. All right. Let's see here. Rita, good luck to you. And I'm glad you've got a physician that's willing to help you too. Bear with me here, everyone. I'm just cleaning out these questions. All right. Hello, Marianne. Hold on here a second. All right. Let's see. This is from Marianne. Hi, Marianne. Let's see. If my root canals are symptom-free, should I leave these teeth as they are? One was done while I was infected, but not diagnosed with Lyme. Okay. So the issue with root canals is that when you have them, sometimes there can be what are called cavitations that form underneath the tooth root or even within the canal itself. And those areas are pockets where Lyme can sometimes exist, and it's difficult to get the antibiotics there, all right? However, having said that, I know there are some of my colleagues like Dietrich Klinghardt out here in the Seattle area that would suggest that if you should get the teeth removed, okay? He would do that on just about everyone. And I'm not of that camp. What I like to do is to see how you respond. So let's say that you're in a Lyme treatment and you are getting better, then I don't think you need to do anything about your root canal. However, if you are in treatment, let's say you're a year and a half in, and you are not making any headway or you're making limited headway, that's when I'm going to start looking at some of these other layers, like going after root canals, okay? So maybe, but it depends on where you're in your treatment and whether you're getting response from the antibiotics or not, all right? Now, one thing you could do is there are types of dentists called biologic dentists that can do x-rays to see if you actually do have cavitations, and they can even do ozone injections into those and get rid of the germ and save your tooth that way too. So that's something to think about as well too. But the biologic dentist is one that you would want to go to do that, all right? If you happen to be in Seattle, the biologic dentist that I do use here that would have the x-ray equipment to help figure that out for you is a guy named Paul Rubin, and that's Rubin. He's here in Seattle for those of you that are in the area. I know that may not help those of you that are listening from England tonight or even Australia, but just that's what you can do if you're here in the area. All right? All right. Good luck to you, Marianne. Hello, Andrea. Let's see here. Thank you for your help. You're welcome. I have a few questions. First one is, what supplements do you take to heal your gut while on IV antibiotics? What are your thoughts on stem cell treatments for Lyme to rebuild your immune system? Okay, so in terms of what I do to help protect the gut and to support the gut when I've got somebody on antibiotics, number one, probiotics, all right? And I like people to be on a mix of probiotics. My favorite, there's two favorites I have. One is to be on a soil-based mix of probiotics. And there's a product by Prescript called Prescript Assist by Research Nutritionals that has good bacteria from the soil. I like soil-based probiotics. Why would I even focus on soil-based? Well, so our current gut these days, we as humans, our guts are made up. Bacteria in the gut are primarily made up of groups of bacteria called lactobacillus and bifidobacterium. Okay, but that wasn't always so. Probably hundreds of years ago, our bacteria in our gut was more related to what came out of the ground. And how that's so is we would get our food, we'd pull our beets out of the ground and we'd rinse them off and then we'd eat them. But there would always be some soil residue, microscopic soil residue, and we would get those good bacteria out of the ground. Now, there's some good evidence that says soil-based bacteria do a good job regulating the immune system, and they seem to do a good foothold in the intestines of keeping yeast back too, okay? So I would be on Prescript Assist anywhere from 2 to 4 pills one time a day. I would also be on a mix of probiotics that have bifidobacterium and lactobacillus strains, of which the most famous lactobacillus strain is Lactobacillus acidophilus. Many of you are familiar with acidophilus being a probiotic, okay? And the product I like for that, because it uses strains that have been proven to repopulate, is a product called HMF Forte. It's made by a company called Seroil, Genestra Seroil. And I would do 2 to 4 pills one time a day of that, all right? The other thing you might want to consider if you really want to get aggressive would be to be on something called Saccharomyces boulardii, also known as Saccharo B, which is a healthy yeast that lives in our intestines and can be quite useful at preventing C. difficile. Now, C. difficile is a bacteria that can grow too much when we're on antibiotics in our intestines and can give us bad diarrhea. And C. difficile and can tend to get caused by being on antibiotics especially. So I might put people on Saccharo B. I would do 2 pills of that one time a day. Okay, those are just some basic things that I would do. And to protect your gut, I would be on nystatin to help swat down yeast. Beyond that, I actually don't tend to do much more than that unless I get into GI issues. Then I might use supplements depending on what those GI issues are, okay? But the big thing is dump tons of probiotics in. Soil-based, bifidobacterium, lactobacillus, and then the healthy yeast called Saccharomyces boulardii or Saccharo B. Okay? All right. Good luck to you. All right. Let's see here. Hello, Joseph. Let's see. Is Ehrlichia co-infection dead or no longer a threat if my IGeneX results went from IgM to IgG? Is it okay for me to be taking both treatments at the same time? The successful treatment recipe, I only have 1 month left to complete 6 months and just started neuropathy, repair, tingling, numbness, and pain. Okay, so in terms of my recommendations, I think you're asking about doing the successful treatment recipe and doing the added steps to repair nerves that I describe in the article, Neuropathy Repair, Tingling, Numbness, and Pain. Yes, it's okay to layer those recommendations for neuropathy onto the things that you're doing as part of the successful treatment recipe. Okay, I think that's what your question is. Yes, it's okay to do that. Okay, all right. Then, in terms of Ehrlichia, I generally think that as long as you treat Ehrlichia, so Ehrlichia, everyone, is a co-infection, another germ you get when you get a tick bite. And in my experience, I think it's fairly easy to treat. You just need to be on a tetracycline, which is either doxycycline or minocycline or tetracycline for at least 2 weeks. So usually I don't even do special testing for Ehrlichia because I know that somewhere when I treat somebody for Lyme, I'm going to put them on a tetracycline for at least 2 weeks as part of treating Lyme, because tetracyclines treat spirochete Lyme and intracellular Lyme, and I use a lot of them. And so I don't really do much to test for Ehrlichia. Okay, now, when it comes to antibodies, there's 2 families that we get for infections. There's IgM antibodies and there's IgG antibodies. IgM antibodies occur when you have acute infection and in all infections except in Lyme infection, not in Ehrlichia, but in Lyme infection. In all infections except in Lyme infection, IgMs will go away by around 3 months, and they're going to be replaced by IgG. Once you develop IgGs, they will remain. You cannot tell by looking at an IgG, though, whether the infection is gone or not, because they're going to develop regardless of whether the infection is in you or not. Okay, now, Lyme is the exception to this rule. In Lyme, about 80% of the time that somebody has Lyme, they will still keep making IgM antibodies even after a year of infection. And in Lyme, a lot of doctors, infectious disease doctors especially, will look at that IgM, and if somebody's been sick for a year or more, they want to call the IgM Western blot test that's positive a false positive. Well, it happens 80% of the time. It's hard to believe that something that happens 80% of the time is false, okay? So it's, the infectious disease doctors, instead of thinking, wow, that's interesting, I wonder why, they just want to go ahead and put their heads in their sand and say it's all false positive, which isn't true, okay? But in regarding your question, an IgG being there does not say the germ is gone. It just means that that's what's happened, is that it's done what it's supposed to, is that by 3 months in most infections, IgGs will develop. And once they develop, they can continue fighting an infection that is there. But it also will develop if an infection is gone. You can't tell by looking at the IgG. But Joseph, again, somewhere in your infection or your treatment, if you've used a tetracycline for at least 2 weeks, you would have taken care of your Ehrlichia. All right? I hope that answers your question, and good luck to you. All right, so those 2 articles that Joseph has written about here, I just want to show them to everyone so that you know what he's talking about. All right, so if you want to know how I recommend treating Lyme, the steps that you should take, look under my treatment protocol. That's called the successful treatment recipe, okay? And in here, I say there's many things you should correct. Number 1, you got to get sleep, because sleep lowers cytokines. And I talked earlier tonight about cytokines, but sleep lowers them. Sleep restores your immune system, okay? Number 2, I like people to be on a paleo type diet, especially at the beginning. Now, paleo doesn't work for everyone, okay? But that's a general recommendation, and I tell you how to do that. And there's an article about that paleo diet here. Number 3, lower cytokines, because too many cytokines make you feel bad, but they also suppress the immune system. And I give you ideas on how to do that here. Number 4, be on something that helps support your body under stress. I like ashwagandha for that. Number 5, correct hormonal problems. And I give you some natural medicines and some prescriptions to do that. And I tell you how to figure it out too. Number 6, be on a good multivitamin. Number 7, get yeast out if they're there, because those yeast are going to trigger more cytokines. Number 8, treat your Lyme infection. Number 9, do some basic detox steps. Number 10, treat Bartonella or Babesia if they're there. And then I talk about adding additional medicines, okay, which would be what you're talking about, what to do for your neuropathy, all right? And then in terms of the article that he was talking about for nerve repair, take a look at the section called chapter called Brain and Nerves. And then take a look at my article called Neuropathy Repair, Heal That Tingling, Numbness, and Pain. And I lay out the steps you can take to repair nerve injury once it's happened in Lyme too, okay? All right, let me go back here. All right, Joseph, good luck to you. Thank you for that question. Hello, Jerry. Let's see. Hi, Dr. Ross. Thanks for all you do. You're welcome. My main problem is stiffness and weakness in my legs, making it difficult to walk. I had a Western blot sent to Hygienics. My results are IgM 2325 was indeterminate, 41 is positive. My IgG is 31 indeterminate, 41 positive, and 45 positive. In your opinion, is this a positive result for Lyme? Jerry, it's an in-between result. It's a not negative or not positive. It's an indeterminate test, okay? Let me try to briefly explain it. And you might, for a more detailed explanation, you might want to take a look at the article that I have on how to interpret a Western blot. I'll show you that here in a minute, all right? So what a Western blot is, a Western blot is a method that we use to see if your immune system makes antibodies that attach to proteins found in the covering of the Lyme germ. And we look to see if we have antibodies from two families, a family called IgM antibodies, a family called IgG antibodies, all right? When IGeneX does this test, they look to see if you have antibodies against 12 proteins, and we identify those proteins by what they weigh. So there is a protein found on the covering of the Lyme germ that weighs 23 to 25 kilodaltons. That's also called band 2325, okay? The one that weighs 41 kilodaltons is called band 41, all right? Now, a test is positive if you have antibodies against 2 of the following 6 proteins. Those proteins are 2325, 31, 34, 39, 41, and protein 8393. You have antibodies against 2 of those, okay? So wherever you see a plus on your Western blot, or 2 pluses or 3 pluses, means you definitely got antibodies stuck on that protein. Indeterminate means either there's some dirt that showed up on the test strip, or you are making antibodies, but at a level that it's just not strong enough to truly say they're there. They're kind of a weak response, okay? So what I do in a situation like this, because if that indeterminate at 2325 on your IgM Western blot is really antibodies, if they really are antibodies there, I would call that a positive test, all right? Same with your IgG. So what you can do if you're still trying to explore whether you might have Lyme, a follow-up thing you could do would be to start using either doxycycline, Biaxin, or minocycline to treat Lyme. And after about 3 to 4 weeks, repeat your Western blot. Here's the reason for that. So the reason you may be having an indeterminate 2325, again, is that you have a weak immune system reaction. It's just not strong to be fully detected. And that can happen for 2 reasons. One is when you have Lyme in you, it releases chemicals that suppress the immune system. So the immune system has a hard time making those antibodies, okay? But the second problem that can happen is that your Lyme likes to live in tissues that don't have good blood flow. Lyme doesn't like to live in the blood because oxygen in blood can kill Lyme, all right? So it's designed to survive. I mean, Lyme is really masterful when it comes to surviving, okay? So what you can do is when you use antibiotics, you kill the Lyme that lives in the tissues, and tissues don't like to hold on to dead bug parts, if you will, right? So they release the Lyme proteins like protein 31 and protein 2325. They release those proteins into the bloodstream where guess what can see it now? The immune system has an easier time seeing it, all right? And so the immune system can have a stronger reaction, all right? So that's called an antibiotic provoked challenge. Another thing you could consider doing would be to do a type of blood test called an ELISpot. If you're here in the States, the way you get an ELISpot done is through a lab called Pharmacin Labs. Another way to do it is through a lab out of Germany called Armin Labs. Armin does an ELISpot too. What an ELISpot does is it looks to see if a type of a white blood cell called a T cell has ever reacted against Lyme. And the only way you're going to have that reaction is if Lyme has been in you, okay? So that's another thing that you could look at doing too. But what I would say is that your testing is indeterminate, all right? Now, one last thing you need to consider is when you make a Lyme diagnosis, it's not about the test. All right? A test is one part of the thing that we consider, all right? You actually consider 4 things, and it's possible to have Lyme even with negative testing. And so if I were to visit with you, what I'd be trying to figure out is, do you have enough other stuff here that says Lyme, all right? So one thing I would ask is, that would want to know is there a risk you could have gotten it? All right, so are you a deer hunter in New Jersey where 95% of ticks carry Lyme? And you were bit by that tick. Well, guess what? You have a high risk, okay? But not everyone remembers tick bites. And so I still want to try to do things to figure out, have you done activities that might have put you in contact with ticks, all right? Or have you had a sexual partner that might have had Lyme before? Because maybe that's a risk for some people too. So we'd look at risk factors, okay? Second thing you got to look at, are there enough symptoms that suggest Lyme? So yeah, these symptoms you have could suggest Lyme, but boy, there's a lot of other symptoms I would want to know if they're there too, because these symptoms alone do not mean Lyme. Okay. And then the third thing I would look at is, are there any physical exam findings? And the fourth thing I look at um, um, is there a supportive test? In other words, is there a test that says Lyme? Now, again, 15 to 20% of the time, I will diagnose Lyme without a positive test because Lyme testing isn't always positive in this disorder, okay? All right. So let me show you an article that you should look at. There's two, actually, for more information about this. All right, so I'm back in the Lyme book. There's one article that, let's see, look in the chapters tab and look at how to diagnose, all right? And so in terms of how to diagnose Lyme, where I talk about that it's more than a test, take a look at this article called How to Diagnose Chronic Lyme Disease More Than Test, okay? It's actually a video article that I have about it, all right? All right, and then in terms of Western blot, take a look at in the chapters under test. And there's a video article I have on the Western blot. And it's this one called the Western blot test on Lyme bite. All right, take a look at this. And there's a video where I go over how you interpret the Western blot. Okay, all right. Let me go back here. All right, Jerry, good luck to you. And thank you for that question. Let me just do it. Jerry's got a second question, but this will be a quick response. Let's see. I was also positive for one copy of C677T MTHFR mutation. Will this mutation cause a problem with detoxing and feeling better? Thank you. It could, but so Jerry, with this kind of detox problem, I find limited benefit often in treating for just a C677T1 problem, okay? But it might make a difference, but I just don't see big benefits for going after this kind of a situation. All right. All right, what's Jerry talking about? There's an article I have, everyone, called on MTHFR detox that gives you a lot of details about that. You would find that in the detoxification chapter, okay? All right, let's see here. All right, let's see. Hi, Joseph. Let's see. I purchased your Treat Lyme Disease lifetime membership, and it's well worth it. And I consider the price to be that of a nonprofit charity. Thank you, Joseph. Thank you for supporting the work I do. I try to put a lot of work into that. Again, I've been having a little trouble with the pay part of that, but I think I'm getting it corrected here. But I appreciate when you support the work, everyone. When you buy the Treat Lyme book, when you buy access to the Treat Lyme book, keep in mind you're actually supporting these webinars as well too. This is how I am able to take the time away from family and others to be here, is by doing that. All right. So I appreciate any support that you give so that I can keep helping people as well too. Thank you very much, Joseph. I appreciate that. Hello, Diane. Let's see. Hello. Recent lab test results for Epstein-Barr virus showed for Epstein-Barr VC, IgG was 4.12. Epstein-Barr virus anti-nuclear antigen IgG was 259. My question is, should I be concerned? Can EBV IgG convert to EBV IgM? So on your second part of your question, will the IgG results once you have made IgG antibodies for Epstein-Barr, the monovirus, can you get IgMs? The answer is no. It doesn't happen that way. Once you make IgGs, you keep making them and you don't go back to making IgMs, okay? That's been my observation, all right? Now, should you be concerned about Epstein-Barr virus? The answer is usually not. All right, I'm not a big treater of viruses. I will treat chronic virus infections like an Epstein-Barr if we're about 9 months, 12 months or more into a treatment and somebody's not getting better. Then I start wondering if those chronic virus infections can actually be part of the problem, right? So why is it that I can be so hands-off about viruses? Well, I think for most people, it's just background noise, all right? And what I mean by that is, if we were to pull 100 healthy people off the street and we were to do studies, we would find elevated antibodies in about 10% of people against either Epstein-Barr, human herpes virus type 6, or cytomegalovirus, all right? So these are viruses that occur in healthy people. Now, if you were to pull fatigued people off the street, you would find that maybe around 20 to 30% would have elevated antibodies against those viruses, okay? And what the problem is, it doesn't, what it means is probably is when you have Lyme, these viruses may tend to get more active due to immune suppression from Lyme and from increased cytokines and from yeast triggering increased cytokines and from hormonal problems from Lyme, okay? So the way that I go after these chronic viruses that live in us, even healthy people, and it's not clear that they really are causing your problems in Lyme disease, is to start fixing the Lyme and get to sleep and do all of those things that I recommend in the successful treatment recipe first, because that's going to be enough usually to turn your immune system back on. So it's going to put these viruses back under control on its own. Okay. All right. That's my approach. So I usually wouldn't do anything with this until maybe 9-12 months into infection. If a person's not getting better, then I might consider going after the viruses. Okay. All right. Good luck to you, Diane. All right, let's see here. Kristen. Hello, Kristen. Let's see. Hi, Dr. Ross. In addition to being a common cohort to Lyme, I've read that Marcons is often exacerbated by long-term antibiotics. 3 questions, if this is true. What is the reason? What symptoms typically raise the flag for Marcons? And do you pursue diagnosis and treatment in the absence of symptoms? Okay, so Marcons, everyone, stands for methicillin-resistant coagulase negative strep. That's a big mouthful. And that has all been shortened down to the term called Marcons, okay? Marcons is a concept, an idea that comes to us out of Richie Shoemaker, who I talked about earlier tonight for his work of discovering mold toxicities. He then went on to come up with this term called chronic inflammatory response syndrome. And in his protocol of dealing with chronic inflammatory response syndrome, step 1 is get your mold toxins out. And if somebody doesn't do better, step 2 is to do a nose swab of your nose passages and see if you might have this thing called methicillin-resistant coagulase negative strep, okay? Because he thinks if you have that triggers ongoing inflammation. Okay, now I got to tell you, I used to swab people for this condition, and there usually aren't symptoms of it, Kristen. It's one of those things, it's an asymptomatic problem, okay? But the reality is I treat Marcons, and I used to swab people for it. And as I talk now with many of my colleagues that have tried to do this, and even Richie Shoemaker now is starting to talk about this too, although he doesn't say so publicly, it's practically impossible to get rid of Marcons. I mean, you can do months of antibiotics. You can do oral antibiotics coupled with antibiotic nose spray. And this stuff, you just can't get rid of it. So I just don't go after it, because even if I did get rid of it, which was rare when I used to treat for it, I didn't find much benefit from it. Secondly, it's practically impossible to get rid of it. It keeps coming back again and again. And so I just don't think that it matters, actually. So I don't treat for Marcons anymore. Secondly, there aren't symptoms of it. It's an asymptomatic problem, something you would only know if you have, if you swab the nose. And again, I'm just not impressed with whether it makes a difference to treat it. And again, even the treatments, which is using an antibiotic nose spray, as well as doing a rifampin as an antibiotic, probably just don't work for the majority of people. All right? All right. Thanks for that question. Good luck to you. Let's see. All right, let's see. James Hayden, let's see. I'm having terrible nerve pain. And it looks like from another question he wrote, that James wrote, that he has Lyme, okay? All right, so for nerve pain, one of the things you want to do, I've written an article about how to heal nerve injury. And nerves that have been injured are in pain, okay? So first of all, make sure you treat for your infections. And the 2 infections I would think of with bad nerve pain are Lyme and Bartonella. Make sure the treatment's being done for those, okay? Secondly, you can heal the injury. And the way you do that is there's about 3 to 4 different things, about 4 or 5 different things you might want to take. Okay. Number one, you want to lower nerve inflammation by being on curcumin that I have written about. Okay. You'll see that in the article that I showed earlier about how to heal nerves. All right. That's curcumin, 500 milligrams 3 times a day. It gets inside of white blood cells and limits cytokine production. Number two, you want to also heal the covering of the nerves as well as the covering on the energy factories found in every one of our cells, including nerves, called mitochondria. And the product that does that is something called NT factor, 2 pills 3 times a day. Number three, raise glutathione levels inside the nerves. Glutathione it helps liver detox, but glutathione fixes injury to any one of your cells, including nerve cells, okay? And you would want to do 5 milliliters of something called Tri-Fortify Orange or Tri-Fortify Watermelon, 5 milliliters 1 time a day, okay? Or you could raise glutathione instead by doing the glutathione. You can raise glutathione by taking something called N-acetylcysteine, 500 milligrams 3 times a day. All right. So fix the covering with NT factor, get inflammation down with curcumin, heal from the inside by raising glutathione by taking N-acetylcysteine or glutathione. Okay. All right. Fourth thing that you want to do if you are is to be on coenzyme Q10, 400 milligrams 2 times a day. But if you have babesia and you are doing babesia treatment with Mepron, Malarone, or anything with atovaquone in it, you do not want to be on CoQ10. That will block the effectiveness of those medications, okay? And then finally, if you do not eat red meat periodically, you need to be on something you would get from red meat called acetyl L-carnitine, 500 milligrams 1 or 2 times a day, all right? So those are some thoughts about what to do to heal. Okay. In addition, you can treat nerve pain for the symptom of nerve pain by using either anti-seizure medicines like gabapentin or Lyrica, or antidepressant medicines like nortriptyline or desipramine. Okay, those can sometimes help. And then finally, there is an herb called L-theanine, and that's Theanine, which is a component of green tea, but it's not caffeine, okay, that is converted in the brain into a chemical called GABA. And if you give GABA to the brain, that can help bring nerve pain down, all right? And that's a 100 milligram pill, and you can take up to 4 of those 3 times a day to help to change the nerve transmission of that nerve pain, all right? So if to read more about that, I have this all written. I know I just went through it quickly, but I'm just going to show you again the article that I showed everyone earlier tonight. Take a look in the Treat Lyme book, look under the brain and nerves chapter, and take a look at this article called Neuropathy Repair, Heal That Tingling, Numbness, and Pain, where I lay all of that out for you, okay? All right? And yeah, all right, let me go back here. Okay, James, good luck to you. Thank you for that question. Let's see. Hello again. Hi, Diane. Hello again. Can Bartonella cause different rashes other than stretch marks? Thank you. Yeah. Bartonella, so it's known for giving that rash that looks like a stretch mark, but it can give little red spots that look like small pimples, for instance. It can give a reticular pattern where it looks like webbing on your skin in a sense. So yeah, there are some different rashes that you can get from Bartonella. All right. Let's see here. And John says, thank you. You're welcome, John. All right, let's see. Hello, Val. Hi, Dr. Ross. Could you explain some of the ways Lyme, Bart, and Babesia organisms are thought to interact in a patient with multiple infections to make the disease symptoms even worse? Have often heard Bart and Lyme often produce the worst case of neurological Lyme. Is that true? So, Val, just generally, so when you have Lyme and you have co-infections, it makes it harder to treat the Lyme, first of all right? Secondly, it is my observation that the effects of the germs together add to create the worst scenarios. All right. Now, why exactly? That's hard to say. I would be speculating on the why part here. In terms of when you've got somebody with neurologic Lyme that's severe, always think that Bartonella is there. We tend to see that, and you just assume it's there, and you treat for Bartonella if there is quite a bit of neurologic stuff going on. When somebody's got those are just some thoughts. So yeah, I would agree with your comment. That is, when somebody has a worst case of neurologic Lyme, is Bartonella part of it? Probably so. Okay. All right. Good luck to you. Thank you for that question. Hello, Fiona. Let's see here. If doctors won't accept IgG positive tests, would running a Lyme co-infection panel help? Is it possible to have Lyme and no co-infections? Thanks for giving your time. I find your book very helpful. Boy, it's a hard thing. It's a shame that the medical community lines up against a good lab, IgG. Okay, so IgG has done their own validation studies where they actually have been given samples of that have blood from the Centers for Disease Control that are known to have Lyme. All right, they're given samples, and they were asked to use their test to see if they could correctly identify. And from that validation study, they were able to figure out how good their test is at finding it, and basically, okay, they were able to look at something called sensitivity and specificity. Okay, so the reason I like IgG is they've done the steps that labs should do, and that is they've tried to take steps to prove that their test actually works to do what they say it does. All right. So based on their internal validation studies, they are able to find Lyme if it's there about 80 to 85% of the time. Now, what's interesting is in those same validation studies using the CDC protocol for how you interpret a Western blot, the CDC protocol only found it 60 to 65% of the time. Okay. So anyhow, I just want to let you know, they've done the studies. There's proof that their study does what it says it's supposed to do, which is find Lyme when it's present. Now, why other medical communities will not accept that, I don't know. It's a shame that they don't. Okay. All right. Now, in terms of will it be helpful, can you have Lyme or can you have co-infections independent of Lyme? Yeah, you can. But it does raise the possibility of having Lyme if you do have co-infections. Now, if you give that data to a physician who's already a naysayer about Lyme, will it make a difference? Usually not, unfortunately. Your best bet is to wind up working with a doctor that gets IgG, accepts IgG, knows how to work with Lyme disease. And usually those are going to be people that are a member of a group called ILADS, the International Lyme Associated Disease Society. Okay. All right. Good luck to you, Fiona. And thank you for that question. All right. Let's see here. This is from Fiona again. Let's see. Can chronic fatigue and weakness be symptoms of Bartonella or other co-infection? Would this be eliminated after a month of doxycycline, or is recurrence possible? Being treated for Lyme but not getting traction with energy. Okay. So fatigue and weakness can be part of Babesia, Lyme, Bartonella can be part of all of it. Okay. If it is more related to Bartonella, usually within a month or two of an effective treatment for Bartonella, you'll start to see it lift. And that's if you have chronic Lyme. All right. I would need to know a lot more. I would need to ask a lot more questions, Fiona, to help figure out what exactly your infections are and how they're contributing to your illness. And I wouldn't be able to actually do that in this kind of a format. So anyhow, all right. Thank you for that question, though. If you do want to see more about how do you figure out which co-infections you have, so I have a whole chapter in the Treat Lyme book called How to Diagnose. Take a look at the one on how to diagnose Babesia, and this one called It Could Be Bartonella Babesia, which gives you information about how to figure out if Bartonella is present. Okay. All right. Let me go back here. All right, let's see here. All right, this is from Randy. Let's see here. Hi, Randy. Let's see. When you mentioned deja vu being a symptom of babesia, I have lots of old visions, like high school stuff, childhood trauma, lots of thoughts from the past. Is that what you mean by deja vu? I have lightheadedness, dizzy headaches. I'm on Banderol, Cemento, and Cryptolepis. What do you think? Okay, so no, that is not what I mean by deja vu. Deja vu is a distinct situation that happens like when something happens in front of you, right in the moment it happens. Like somebody rides by on a red bicycle. You instantly think, God, I have been here before. This exact situation has happened and I've been part of it. Okay. It's like in the split second that something is going on out there, you have a sense right then that this has happened to you before, right in that moment. Okay. That's deja vu. That's not quite what you're describing here. Okay. Now, could your headaches and dizziness be part of, and the lightheadedness be part of Lyme and be part of babesia? Yeah, I would still have to figure out what all is there. I would need to ask you a lot more questions, and I would take a look at those articles that I just showed you. Okay? All right. Thanks for that question, Randy. All right. That's it for me for tonight, everyone. I've enjoyed being here with you tonight. There's a lot of great questions. Some of them I couldn't answer, as you know, but that happens sometimes. At least I was able to remember the name of Trevor Marshall, though. That did come back. I get worried when I have those 50-year-old moments and things don't return as they should. Anyhow, I will get an email out to you all tomorrow morning, somewhere by 6 to 6:30 Seattle time. At least that's my intention, with the link to the recording of tonight's webinar. We have another webinar scheduled for next week and the one after that as well, too. I hope you'll join me for those. In a second here, I'm going to take you over to the Treat Lyme book. As of earlier today, I think that my subscription window was working, but I'm not quite sure. But if you would be so kind as to subscribe, I'd appreciate that. So if you are asked to subscribe to an article that you have to subscribe for it, please go ahead and subscribe. I appreciate that. That's how I keep doing this work here. Also, when I take you over to the Treat Lyme book here in a minute, you can go there to sign up for next week's webinar too. Okay? So I'm going to redirect you there now. Good night, everyone, and I hope to see you next week. And thanks for being here tonight.